Hello, welcome to IT Lifestyle, and in this video we're going to learn on setting up a Windows Server 2019. And before looking on how to set up a Windows Server 2019, let's look at the hardware requirements for Windows Server. As you see on the screen, I have opened the Microsoft article where it shows the hardware requirements that are suggested and recommended by Microsoft. And as you see, the processor that they are recommending is 1.4 gigahertz 64-bit processor. That's a minimum processor requirement. And the RAM that they are suggesting, the minimum recommended is 512 MB. For a 2 GB for server with desktop experience installation, which is an option. But if you create a virtual machine with a minimum supported hardware parameters, one processor core and 512 MB RAM, then it might attempt to install this release on the virtual machine, but the setup will fail. So to avoid this, we have to do one of the following. Allocate more than 800 MB RAM to the virtual machine on which you intended to install this release. Once the setup has completed, you can change the allocation to as little as 512 MB RAM, depending on the actual server configuration. If you have modified the boot image for setup with additional languages and updates, you may need to allocate more than 800 MB RAM in order to complete the installation. Well, there is one more, but I believe this will be good enough if you are using a local PC to set up a Windows server which only has like 4 GB of RAM um, to set up a virtual machine. So let's look at the other requirements that Microsoft has been recommending. The storage, the following are the minimum disk space requirements, which is 32 GB. Well, here is something that we have to be aware. The 32 GB should be considered an absolute minimum value for successful installation. This minimum should allow you to install Windows Server 2020 using the server core installation option. And the IIS server role. The server in server core model is about 4 GB smaller than the same server using the server with desktop experience installation option. The same partition will need extra space for any of the following circumstances. If you need to install the system over a network, computers with more than 16 GB RAM will require more disk space for paging, hibernation, and dump files. And what about the network adapter requirements? An Ethernet adapter capable of at least 1 gigabit per second throughput. And the other requirements are basically depending upon what type of server that you're actually trying to use. It can be DVD drive, graphics device, and monitor capable keyboard and Microsoft mouse, internet access, and trusted platform module like TPM and or printers too. Here is something that we have to note, the TPM. A trusted platform module is required in order to use certain features such as BitLocker, drive encryption. If your computer uses TPM, it must meet these requirements. Hardware-based TPMs must implement version 2.0 of the TPM specification. TPMs that implement version 2.0 must have an EK certificate that is either pre-provisioned to the TPM by the hardware vendor or be capable of being retrieved by the device during the first boot. TPMs that implement version 2.0 must ship with SHA-256 PCR banks and implement PCR zeros through 23 for to SHA-256. So select File and click on New Virtual Machine. And as you see, I'm using VMware Workstation Pro 17, and it will be looking the same if you're using 14, 15, 16. So I'm going to use typical as it's recommended instead of using a custom. In custom, you can choose how you would like to have your VMware configured, but we're going to use the typical, which is recommended. And then you should first download the ISO file, or you can choose that you will be installing operating system later, but it's better to choose when you're doing it. So if you see, like when I browse, I have my Windows Server Data Center to 2019 server. So I'm going to select open and then click next. So we don't have a product key, so we're going to just leave it as it is, and we can either choose a data center or a standard core. We'll give the username as test account and the password. Even though it shows the password is optional, it would be great if you set the password. So it says you did not enter a Windows product key. Windows will install without one, but must manually activate it later. Say yes. I'm gonna choose it as test VM. So the standard size is, like a 60 or 40 based on what you're gonna run on this. In the next sessions, we're gonna see on how to install AD, and how to install DHCP, DNS. So I'm gonna keep it as an 80, as I don't have too much space on my PC. And if you have like 1 TB SSD, then you can choose a better of hard disk. And here I'm gonna customize. It says like 2 GB approximately, like I'm gonna give like 3 GB. That's more than enough in order to spin in VM. And process 2, and I have connected the ISO image, and we're going to keep the network adapter as NAT. Or you can use the bridged connected directly to the physical network. And I'm going to leave the remaining settings as it is and close and click on finish. So it says you're running this virtual machine with the side channel migrations. Okay, but we don't need it, so we're gonna just say okay. I'm gonna close the library. As you have seen, it's loading the windows, and we just have to give it some time to load. As you see, the Windows Server setup is starting. At any time, you can actually skip if you have been waiting on the video, and you can see the further steps. As you see, we can actually make a full screen. Close the blue one. So Windows Server standard. If you see like the recommended, the option omits most of the Windows graphical environment, manage with a command prompt and PowerShell. So we don't really want to manage it in with using command prompt or PowerShell. So we're going to take the desktop experience, which gets with a graphical environment like GUI, but it consumes actually some extra space, but it is fine. So I'm going to take actually the data center. Here it takes a bit of time. So I'm going to pause and will again continue with once the features update and everything is finished. So all the 4 steps were done and the Windows is just restarting. Well, in the meantime, looking at the hardware components that we have choose while building this VM, we have choose only 2.9 GB RAM and 80 GB storage. So as it's a test VM, I have choose 3 GB. But when you're going into the live environment, the minimum standard requirements will be either be given by the product that you're going to choose, or you have to see like what the application does and you have to choose accurately on how much we need to give. For example, let's say we have AD Connect, which syncs the on-prem AD and the Azure AD. In this way, like we need a server to run 24/7 so that the AD sync happens. For the AD sync server, we need a minimum of 4 GB and 70 GB of storage. So we need like 4 GB RAM and 70 GB of storage. And for example, let's say we are running a print server on which we have like all the printers. And in order to run a print server, we actually need a minimum of 8 GB RAM, depending upon the number of printers you actually have. But it's always good to have like 8 GB RAM with 80 GB of storage. So always remember the hardware components of the server totally depends upon the product or this the applications that you're actually running on the server. So In the meantime, we can see that the Windows server has been loaded, and let's see what we actually have over here. As I have given 3 GB, it's just taking a lot of time to load. So what we can actually do is we can just do a shutdown and increase the it's an unplanned, increase the RAM now to at least like a 6 GB and see like how it goes further. So the VM is shutting down and we can go to the home, and let's see on how we can actually change the settings or the hardware components once the VM has been built. So we can just say run in the background, and here you can see our test VM, and once you clicked on it you can see like the edit virtual machine settings. Over here let's choose something 4048 and let's see how much it is. It should be around 4 GB. Yeah, exactly 4 GB. Processor and everything we can leave it as it is. And now let's power on the VM, the test VM that we have created. Yes, and let's see how it actually responds now. Well, we haven't increased too much, but there should be a slight increase in the speed while booting up the VM, like the Windows server, or even when we are trying to open any applications on the server. So in order to give Alt Control Delete on VMware Workstation Pro, we have this tab. As we have given the password, it's just like we have to enter the password. So let's see how much time it will take to open us the start menu. So when compared to the last time, now it is a bit fast. So let's go to the server manager and look at the server, and also let's go into MS Info 32 and look at, okay, sorry, bad. Just go to run and MS Info 32. So if you see, the OS is Microsoft Windows Server 2019 Data Center, and the version, and it's a build version. And if you scroll down here, we will be able to see like how much physical RAM we have allocated and the time zone. So we can just close and go to the local server, and here we can see actually the name. It's just taking time. Here you can see the name actually, and it is a Microsoft Windows Server 2019 data center. Well, you can actually find the ISO file from Microsoft downloads, software downloads, and from where you can download the ISO file. And in the next videos, let's see on how we can change the computer name and how to install an Active Directory domain services on this server and connecting it to a domain. Thank you for watching. If you have liked, please subscribe to my channel and please leave a comment.